What's real? What's deception? What should we be paying attention to? What is it that's driving us insane?
The world will not be the same. People laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remember the lines from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita.
The New York Stock Exchange, the Nikkei, and the Hang Seng as Manhattan prepares for massive evacuation. In other cities around the world, people are voluntarily evacuating population centers.
Something happening here.
You're listening to this. You're listening to this. You are the resistance. You are the resistance.
Truth Connections.
You can have things that happen to you in your life that are very traumatic at a young age, and you can choose to love instead of constantly be in fear. You can choose to work through it. You can choose to see the light side of a situation or a person versus the dark. You have to be able to look at where you've gone wrong in your own life and where you're responsible and where things went ugly, and then you see things more positively.
Good evening. Welcome. This is Kathy, and you are listening to Truth Connections. Thank you for being here live in the chat room or at our YouTube channel or the Blog Talk Radio archives after the show listening. The opening song was called With Christ by Protetius. And joining me as guest host this evening is Hal Terran. Good evening, Hal.
Good evening, everybody.
How you doing?
Great.
Thanks for being here. We're happy you're here. Tonight's show is actually on Friday because it's a makeup date from October 30th, when we were supposed to have Jason on before. We decided to postpone the date due to Hurricane Sandy, and on that note, I would like to ask everyone's support for Occupy Sandy in any relief efforts that are continuing today. I'm sure they would appreciate that. Tonight's guest is Jason Gregory. He is a researcher in the field of suppressed history, depth psychology, esoteric knowledge, Buddhism, Tao, and Hermeticism. He is the author of the book Way of the Weirdo, which is an intriguing, nurturing, thought-provoking, and very deep journey. It's actually endorsed by Graham Hancock, author of Fingerprints of the Gods. He is also the creator of the film The Sacred Sound of Creation, and that film was actually awarded 5 out of a possible 5 stars. Tonight, we'll discuss ancient spiritual traditions, consciousness, and the spirit of our evolving creation, and much more. Please help me welcome Jason Gregory to the show. Welcome, Jason.
It's great to be on, Kathy. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Why don't you first begin with telling us about your book and your movie? What came first, the book or the movie?
A Way of the Weirdo came first. That was actually published on March 1, not officially released to May 1, 2011. The Sacred Sound of Creation came second, which was released this year, February 7, which was actually co-created with Justin Jazuski. I should give him a little shout-out out there. But yeah, it's a great film, and the book's great also. Way of the Weirdo was an interesting journey for myself because it was my own sort of exploration, and that came about. And then sort of the Sacred Sound of Creation was something I worked on last year in an Australian tour. So I turned it into a film, and it's been great.
Excellent. Where would you like to begin, Jason? I want to ask.
Wherever you want to take it.
Where we are collectively, perhaps?
Yeah, where we are collectively, I guess, because we've got a lot of our own sort of projections on the world, I guess, these days about where we are. And I feel a lot of it's unjust, actually, especially in Western society, or I should say in the developed world, actually, that we've extended ourselves into the environment so far that we really don't understand shamanic cultures, ancient philosophy. We've sort of projected this onto the environment through our own understandings. So, this comes about through our understandings of particular prophesized dates, which, we've got a big one coming up in just over a month, which I'm not concerned about at all, but I know there are a lot of people out there who sort of are packing the baked beans in the basement and are a little bit concerned about it. But when we look at particular ancient traditions and how they come to such prophetic dates is because the way that they see time. And the difference between the modern world and the ancient world is that in our modern world, we explore matter. We explore the intricacies of matter and how matter relates to consciousness, where in the ancient world, they really traversed time. They were exploring time, or whatever time is actually. Being so many more intuitive civilizations in the ancient times, they wanted to understand how is their relationship to time. It's one thing you cannot control because time just keeps going and going and going, but how is it in relationship to the universe and themselves? This is how you get certain cultures of the past that make languages that are in a cyclical pattern and not in a linear pattern. And what we have today is we have languages, we have our whole alphabet, and everything is built on a linear system that is just, straight ahead, where in the ancient times they have patterned language. We could look at the Chinese language, for instance, which is built on ideograms or characters, and the Chinese language in itself is not anything of linear in nature. It's a patterned language. It's trying to understand cycles, and it's giving to the reader symbolically what it's trying to say. It's not telling them categorically that this is the way it is. And this is one of the big problems with modern civilization and the ancient world, because, the ancient world understood patterns in nature. They observed nature and understood that they themselves are not different from that. So when they went into the depths of their own being, they could understand that patterns unfold in consciousness as well. So we've got this whole conscious journey that we experience, and time is not different from that. It's, consciousness is attached to time, or what we perceive as time. And in this day and age, with 2012, with the quickening and everything that's happening at the moment, if you understand the way that time relates to your conscious experience, if it's filled a lot with over-information, not contemplative, then time itself will slip out of the grasp of the individual's hands, in the sense of how fast it is at the moment, because we've got oceans of information but not a drop of wisdom. This is basically what's happening in the world at the moment. We've got that much information. It extends the individual outside of the self. It puts them outside of where they're truly from, and it projects them into the external world. The Mayans, for instance, understood patterns in nature. They understood that everything rises and falls, but all things return to the source. They understood this, and and in other traditions they understand this as well. And in Taoism especially, they understand that all things arise and fall, but all things return to the source. Everything is connected. There actually is, in a sense, no birth and death, because it's just one flower blooming and one flower going back to its source, but another flower originally blossoms after that. Everything is contained within the seed. We don't have these notions in the developed world because we've built a system built on a linear model. Everything that's actually built on a linear model is gone away from the natural world. So we could look at governments, banks, corporations, any of those institutions are built on a linear projection. In truth, they're not natural in the truest sense because they are built on a linear model. But then we could bring this back to the individual as what is natural in your own life? Are you living from a linear mode, or have you intuited how a patterned way of thinking works? In the 70s, they proved this through a lot of science, where they said that only computers at the moment have pattern recognition, but humans are supposed to have pattern recognition, but we don't. And this all stems into the ancient Hermetic arts of numerology, astrology, of tarot and Kabbalah, because when you understand synchronicity is itself a part of pattern recognition. It's just seeing that there's a pattern unfolding, but it's almost a language between that underlying field of forces, which is, people call God or Brahman or Tao, and yourself, and being able to intuit it. And a lot of this pattern recognition has been, eradicated from our civilization at the moment, and it's extending ourselves away from the natural world, which is why human beings choose to lord it over nature, because they don't feel that they're part of nature. And actually, I think a lot of things in the conspiratorial arena and a lot of the inauthentic New Age teachings put people into this state, because they have these concepts that the human being is somehow part of another race from another planet that genetically modified us, and also we have these other ideas that we are somehow from a reptilian form or anything like this. A lot of this, I don't want to say none of that's right or wrong, but a lot of that puts into the mind of most people that we're not part of this world, and all you have to do is look within yourself and see how intrinsic you are to the earth, because the same bioelectric force that runs through the earth runs through your body. But we're not taught that. But if you understand more about your inner organs, even of your physical body, you'll see how the bioelectricity that runs through the earth is running through yourself. We are stepping away from that slowly and slowly, and this is one of the big sicknesses of the planet, and why we have entered an era of so-called apocalypse for the last 1,000 years. But I feel that this old pattern is slowly dying and a new one is emerging, actually, Kathy.
I have to agree with you, Jason. I think it'd be a good time now to go into what the illusions are, what the perceptions are, and what the difference is between the fighter and the sage mentality.
This also goes into the lack of knowledge that we're part of the natural world, and not seeing the patterns and the processes of nature take place. I hope people can fully understand this, as the human being is part of the natural world. Mark my words, it's part of the natural world. You only have to observe human civilization to see how it is just like nature, except it expresses itself very differently. What I mean by expresses itself very differently is we have, from a Gnostic perspective, you have science, art, philosophy, religion. which is all an expression of consciousness, trying to understand consciousness. But that's almost like the fragrance of a flower, you could say, but in a human way. But there are more pure expressions than this, obviously, because, when you see the sap of a tree is very pure. I believe human art is like the sap of a tree. It's like the expression of creativity. The problem with the warrior and the sage's perception is, well, the differences, the dichotomy between it and understanding the patterns of nature is, majority of people in the world have a warrior's mode of consciousness, which is basically someone who seeks to impose their own will over a certain situation to change the situation. So they are caught in the detail of reality, you could say. This also extends into all arenas. We can't just exclude the opposement of global tyranny. This also extends into that. Say, for instance, if you're opposing the global elite, in a sense, you're justifying their own existence. In a sense, you are strengthening that illusion. You are disempowering yourself by putting yourself into it and fighting it and actually trying to impose your will over it. Now, again, in this universe, there's neither right or wrong. There's just pattern. So all the sage does, the sage's perception, all they do is they see from above the situation. They see the patterns. Now, this is what pattern recognition is. You can see the forms. Like when you look out your window right now, you can see the forms of the world, but the underlying essence, you can see that formless reality that connects it all.
And intuitively, a sage sees the infinite in all things.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly sort of what Shangzu said, one of the great masters of China. He said, you can see the infinite in all things. And intuitively he knew that, only because he was traveling the depths of his own being and trying to understand why is he here, because it is a pretty amazing thing. We are this amazing complex thing, being a human being, and we exist somehow in this universe, but not many people think that's amazing. I always wake up every day and think it's amazing. So the sage does see the infinite in all things, and they see that certain patterns are arising and dying and rising and dying, and they're not projecting themselves into it, because from their perspective, they've actually dissolved a lot of their conditioning. Now, conditioning is what defines the form. That's what defines you as Kathy, and hell as hell, and me is me, and the microphone is the microphone, etc. So it's actually the conditioning that defines the form. So all the warrior is doing is they're perpetuating their own conditioning. They're projecting their own conditioning onto the environment. Because obviously, from a conditioned sense, from an egotistical sense, we see that there is global tyranny, etc. on the planet. But one of the big problems is a warrior will see that, and from their own states, say if I was to believe I was Australian and a male and whatever, I would be projecting this onto them, because I would be wanting to change the world to suit myself, not to suit everyone else. I'd be doing it to suit myself. This is what I think is comfortable. This is what I find pleasurable in the world. But that mightn't resonate with someone in Mongolia. We've got all these massive philosophical, spiritual questions that are coming up, which I find is great, because it's really putting the individual in a situation where they can deepen their knowledge on themselves and then come back to, say, global tyranny and see it in different eyes. And actually, this is why I mentioned in The Sacred Sound of Creation, I've called it the evolution of perception, because evolution, in a sense, is tied to an individual's realization or an individual's enlightenment. The individual, which is the microcosm of the macrocosm, they're the five-pointed star, changes actually the environment around them. It's not them trying to change the environment, it's them changing their internal environment, which helps change the external environment. When the sage begins to see greater lengths of harmony from above, that perception is what actually changes it, because they don't see separation in its truest sense. They see things all interconnected, everything moving and flowing as one, like one big ocean. Like at the moment, Kathy and Hal, you guys are a wave of this ocean, expressing yourself beautifully, and then one day we'll move back in the oceans. That's what they see, and it's that perception that doesn't judge, that doesn't desire anything in the external arena. There's always going to actually be the warrior and the sage's perception. Let's not mistake this. We're not going to have 1 million sages on the planet, because there would be no point to the manifest world then, because then the manifest world wouldn't be able to express its individuality in different forms. There's always going to be that, but the whole purpose, or why I mention a lot of the sages and the warrior's perception, is because if you can somehow resonate on the higher, the more that will become your mode of awareness. And that doesn't mean in the sense that you lack compassion or empathy in any way. That's kind of a ridiculous way of seeing it. You actually have more compassion, have more empathy, but you have it in a totally different way of consciousness, because you're not going out there in the streets and telling people, wake up, wake up, wake up. You're more centered on your own self, which actually, in that journey with them, that is what inspires others. It's not telling people they should change, it's inspiring people to change.
Lead by example.
Exactly. So that's the age-old thing. It's inspiring people to change without telling them to change. But that doesn't mean we should be a cop-out and egotistically try and inspire people to change. Usually what happens is people who are usually traversing within, they usually have a great depth. This is why when you see a lot of musicians, you can usually pick out musicians who have a great understanding of themselves to ones that are just in it for money. You can see it. You can see it in their eyes. You can see it in their lyrics and in their music. And we're sort of at this moment, because we are separating ourselves from the natural world. We think we are outside of the universe, which is a really interesting understanding. But we have got industries in this world where people are just going in there not for the art of the actual expression. They're just going in there for money. The music industry, I don't like to pick on it, but you can see it big time in the music industry, where you have like American Idol, where it's devoid of creativity. They're performers. They're not being creative in the truest sense. One of my favorite musicians is Maynard James Keenan from Tool. Someone like him has got a very dark character, trying to understand more about himself, and you see it expressed in his lyrics and in his art, but he's not out there trying to impose himself over others and not trying to be famous. This is the whole problem that we have in the world. We've built industries that really do inflate the ego, like in the athletic world, in the musical world, in the acting arena. We find this, that the way that the world is built at the moment is just built on projecting your mind into the environment instead of understanding your mind.
Most definitely. Just to touch base on what you spoke of a few minutes ago, many people believe that we will one day be in harmony with the earth, animals, and people, that we'll all live in harmony, and that we once were that way before. Do you believe that will happen again?
Yeah, I might be an optimist, but yeah, on a physical level, yeah, definitely. I think that when you understand patterns and rhythms, the rhythm of the universe, we can go into, in India, for instance, there's the yugas. There's two systems of the yugas. There's a long count and there's a short count. When you look into the short count, you see it's actually built on a science. It's an actual science that if you go back into history, you can see that there's actually a rhythm in how civilizations and how the individual move. And you see this through the system of the yugas, where you have Satya Yuga, which is the spiritual age, Treta, which is the mental age, and Dwapara, which is the age of energy, which they believe we are in now, and Kali Yuga, which is the material ages, which they believe we've already passed out of some couple of hundred years ago. But this is a sort of a cyclical pattern of the yugas. It's come from the Hindu system, but there's a bigger one and a smaller one. I'm speaking about the smaller one. When you look into that, you see that back in time, I don't believe personally that we've only been here for 10,000 years. I think that's a ridiculous idea, because we've got monuments and that from 40,000 years ago, and ones that you can prove from over 10,000 years ago.
I agree.
So I like to look at it in the Yuga sense, because when you look at it in the Yuga sense, around 12,500, which I believe was the midpoint of Satya Yuga, which is believed to be the spiritual age, was when we had a very highly intuitive civilization who lived in harmony with nature. And this is why you see a lot of monuments and that blended in with nature, and you see a lot of nature around it. The belief in a lot of the schools in India is that that was the time when we were at our peak. Our dharma, in a sense, that our life purpose was realized. We understood even intellectually what God is, which is hard for us to understand now, but understood even intellectually, and understood the necessity to live in harmony with the animals, the plants, and the minerals. And so people did. And then from this 12,500 point, which is the midpoint of Satya Yuga, you sort of have a descension into Kali Yuga. It's called a fallen consciousness. You know, a lot of people believe this is related to the fall in the Bible. I don't want to say that that's right or wrong, but it's interesting. But you have that descension into Kali Yuga, the material ages, and then, you know, obviously you have a civilization built in the external world, so you're trying to understand who you are in the external world. But why I resonate with the Yugas, and I believe there's a truth in it, is because when you look at our civilization at the moment, we've got a highly technologized civilization, and that technology, I believe, is an extension of us in trying to understand who we are as a species and in trying to understand who we are as an individual. And Dwapara Yuga is that age of energy. It was actually one of the great masters who was expounding this information in the 1800s was Swami Sri Yukteswar from Puri in India. He said around 1894, I think, he said, mark my words, there will be a man in the early 1900s who will discover that matter is only condensed energy, and then that energy is made up of atoms. And along came Albert Einstein and Max Planck on cue. But he said this intuitively before that time, and he was one of the greatest advocates of the Yuga system, and he lived by that calendar. He didn't live by the Gregorian calendar, which is built on a linear mode. He lived on a cyclical calendar because it resonated with how the actual civilizations move, ebb and flow. So we have a civilization at the moment which is built on technology, and then in a couple of thousand years when we move out of that, it's believed in Treta Yuga, it's a highly mental age, so we understand a lot about the mind, and we sort of start to move away from technology, and we find our own intuitive latent power that we've suppressed for so long. And then you come into the spiritual age, which is Satya Yuga, where you have complete connection. I think it's a very interesting model, but I from where we sit as a civilization at the moment, there's a lot of truth in it, because we are in an age of technology, we are in an age of energy. You know, it comes back to what I was saying before. It's the developed world is trying to understand energy, matter, while the ancient world was trying to understand time and their relationship to the universe.
Well, our society could still be a little more harmonious. There is a lot of injustice at the present age. What do you think we should do as individuals to move this into greater harmony? Would simply adopting a sage's view on the world change the world?
Well, it's entirely up to the individual, because they've got to resonate with something on their own level. As soon as you try to push someone into a certain way, then you're forcing yourself upon someone. I think it's that whole thing of forcing or being receptive. Now, the reason why we're in this situation is because we've had a civilization built on force, that you need to force yourself upon things to become successful or to be better than others, which is totally opposite to the ancient traditions when they understood the concept of Wu Wei. It erroneously, to a lot of people in the developed world, means laziness or passivity, which doesn't mean anything. It does mean non-action, but what it truly means is not forcing. It means allowing things to happen and then trying to move in relationship to that, you know, almost like a martial artist. Like in martial arts, when someone overextends their reach, if you pull their arm, they hit the ground. So all we have now at the moment is we have a machine which is overextending its reach. We don't need to force ourselves upon it or push it around and think that we're going to have our own way. If it's overextending at its reach, just move slightly and just add a little bit of pressure and it will fall. The thing is, we don't see reality that way in the modern world. When you understand more about the sage's perception and how they see the world, you'll see that a sage is not passive and not ignorant in that way. They know everything that's going on, but they don't see the distinctions between it. They just see the pattern. So what would be the new pattern and what would they resonate with? You know, we could say that, what are some of the new patterns that are emerging? We could say permaculture, self-sustainability. These are, on a physical sense, new patterns that are emerging, which if people are compelled to move with, will bring them into greater harmony with the natural world. You know, we've seen all of this happen. We've seen it doesn't have to be reiterated because we see the evidence of it everywhere. So again, it comes down to the individual. We've got to be serious with ourselves because, a lot of people say they want a different system. They want a different world. They want the global tyrants to fall. But the problem is they still project the stuff that they've created into this new world. Now, we've got to be serious about this because as soon as you say that you actually believe you're from a nation or that you're proud to be from a country or from a religion and this and that, you're actually defining yourself as different or even above the other world. So these are systems that they've built. We've got to be honest here. Like, I was born in a country called Australia. The whole concept of Australia is from them. So for me to change or for me to be that new pattern, do I project myself onto the new world and say, this is what Australian people want, this is what I want because I'm from Australia, this is my comfortability? No, and the answer is no. The answer is, first of all, break that conditioning down. Break that conditioning down to dust so that you can come back into the world and see it with clear eyes, because until you do that, you are impeding the world and you are actually supporting them in a sense, because a lot of people do this. A lot of people, let's look at religion. Religion's a great example for this because we've had holy wars, so-called holy wars, for thousands of years, and it's all built on that, the Christian way of life or the Islamic way of life or the Judaic way of life is the best for everyone. Why? Because that's my conditioning. I'm projecting it onto the environment. Does that contribute to a new world, a new pattern? It only prolongs an old pattern. Those sort of questions are difficult in a sense to answer because sometimes the individual can be so vexed that they have a inner anger towards certain individuals, certain political parties, certain countries, certain religions, that if they were to ask that question, you would try and answer it for them, but they were coming from that place. You cannot really answer the question for them. It's for them to answer. And so, this is the whole thing about collectivism and individualism, or, are we going to evolve collectively, or is it going to slowly happen through the individual's evolution? And as we've seen, the evidence is there in history that it starts with the individual. The individual is the seed of the whole. So, if the individual can burn their latent tendencies, their habitual ways that they have, and break down their conditioning, then they will come into the world fresh, and they will know exactly what to do. Not because they're going to want to oppose the tyrants, but because they're going to just want a different world. They're going to see that something is actually an old pattern that's just, it's murky. It's like, it's like an unflushed toilet. It's just sitting there. So it's moving in a different way, moving in a different mode, moving away from these old patterns. And like I said, we've got to be really serious with ourselves, because as soon as you start to talk about pride or this is what I want for my community or anything like that, then you're still working in their mode. Each human being wants every other human being to have a comfortable life in the sense that they've got food and shelter. And everyone deserves to have a loving family and friends, etc. But a lot of the opposing of tyranny and a lot of the opposing of other people's views doesn't bring that harmonious world that we kind of envision, because the sage's perception is about seeing the harmony in all things. So until you do that, there's no way you can bring harmony into the physical world, because it couldn't happen, because your perception is not harmonious. It's defining the forms. So, how can that help? When I mention a lot of these things in my workshops now, it does spike a lot of people's ears up. But the whole thing is, it's not up for me to tell anyone to change. They can either continue to be caught in the detail and fight what they think they are bringing to justice, or they can try and develop themselves spiritually and gain a sage's perception and a harmonious perception and bring something different into the world. And this is something that's key in the wisdom traditions. It's not until you gain that perception of the world where you can see the harmony and that you can love the whole world, it's not until then that you reveal the virtue of the underlying forces of nature, which is what they call in India Dharma, or in China Te, which is the natural virtue or the spontaneous virtue of the individual. That expresses itself differently through each individual. But it's not until that is revealed that virtue changes the world. That dharma, that te, changes the world, because that's when you bring the creative force back into the world, because you're bringing that creative force back into the world. It's going to create a new pattern. So it's not going to be us just projecting our conditioning, because there's actually nothing creative in that to change. You know, people can either put this into practice and see how it does change things and how it does inspire others, or they continue the other way. It's not for me to decide for them. I know what changes it because I've seen it happen, and I know what doesn't change it because I've seen a whole history of 1,000 years where it doesn't work.
Someone said that one who is actually conscious is able to tap into source and handle any situation with grace and discern and make the right decision in a split second without even knowing they're tapping into source.
Exactly. That's exactly what Te in China and Dharma in India is. It's actually a union. This is what yoga is actually. It's union. It's the union with the source. It's the union of the individual and the source will or divine will or God will, you know, whatever you want to call it. And it's bringing that forward. And it's not a thing that the individual, you could say, you know, they don't think that they're God, you know, like we've got to get out of that sort of idea. It's just, you can see when someone is tapped into the source. You can see that the way that they project information or the way that they speak to others and the humility and the receptivity that they have, that they're in some sense on a higher level than the average Joe, because, you know, they're bringing that virtue into the world. They're bringing that pure light of the source into the world. They're bringing that gnosis into the world. This is what changes it all. You know, this is what changes the whole structure of our reality. When we connect with that, then that's what's going to change. You know, I know that we're actually going to have a system which is not going to be controlled by people and which is going to be moneyless. But is that going to be 21st of December 2012? I think not. You know, that might be a good start, but we're going to have to. We have a lot of work to do. You know, a lot of people in the spiritual traditions call it the great work, which is the work that the individual has to do within themselves, to burn the latent tendencies, to get rid of their habitual ways, and become the real human for the first time. Because at the moment we're not the real human being, because we've got a lot of different masks on ourselves that says this is who I am. You know, it's kind of like when you see people projecting themselves into reality, you can see what they do, who they think they are. And when you ask this person, you say, you know, who are you? And they say, oh, I'm working Wall Street, and, you know, oh, I'm from Mongolia. And it's like, no, that's just what you do and the country that you were born. Who the hell are you? You know, and a lot of people can't answer these questions because they're not participating in what the ancients called the great work.
That's where it all starts. Honestly, that's where it all starts. We need to look at ourselves in the mirror, look at ourselves in the eye, and say, who am I? What do I want? What's going to make me happy? What can I accomplish?
Exactly. And see, until we do that, we can't trust each other. And that's why we have a whole civilization built on a lack of trust, because we don't trust our neighbor in anything, actually. We don't trust the next country to do whatever. That's why we have wars, etc. And this is all a hypnosis of the ego. This is all because we don't know the true self. So we obviously lack trust in everything, you know, even in the universe, which is ridiculous. We don't even trust our own experience. This comes into an old ancient philosophy, which comes from Asia, which is called Zhujian. And Zhujian is actually how the self, the nature of the being, is spontaneous. But that corresponds to the universe. The nature of the universe is spontaneity. And you can see this. Say if you were to plan tomorrow, I'm going to do this at 10 o'clock, this at 11 o'clock, this at 12 o'clock. And when you go to do all these things, you will see how certain things pop up that you didn't even expect. And sometimes you won't even reach these deadlines. This is the spontaneous nature of the universe. And what we have done is we've stepped into a world of linear thinking. So we've stepped away from the way that the universe is, the way that the cosmos is. The way the universe is spontaneity. It's there. It's always happening. It's spontaneous. It's something that you cannot control. It's beyond your will. In a sense, it's part of your will, but it's just something that keeps going. And the thing is, we think that we're not actually part of that. We're not part of that spontaneity. In Zhujian, in China, it's everything happens of itself. So everything emerges of itself. It's grown of itself. And so what we have is we have a civilization that's built on a lack of trust. So since it's built on a lack of trust and we think linear, we build governments, corporations, banks, prison institutions, etc., because we've built it on this lack of trust. And this corresponds to an ancient philosopher in the 1800s from Russia. His name was Peter Kropotkin. He opposed Darwinian's model of evolution, and at the time people thought he was a nutcase. But when you look at Peter Kropotkin's philosophy, it's brilliant. It's called Kropotkin's anarchy because he understands that the universe itself is spontaneous. So it happens of itself. And he understood that human beings are not separate from nature, are not separate from the universe. So he always promoted that if we were to get rid of these illusions of these linear models of governments, banks, all of these institutions, etc., and we could finally trust others, then a natural system would grow of itself. A natural
order to the universe.
A natural order to the universe would happen of itself, beautifully, Kathy. And that's in trusting the human and in each other and our own experience. So trusting the self and trusting the others around you. But we haven't built a society built on that. And so, Peter Kropotkin was way before his time. That's why in the 1800s he was laughed at. But Zujan is basically the spontaneous nature of the whole universe, which you are not outside of. And this is why I try to live a very spontaneous life, or very intuitive life, because, that's just the way I am. But because what I've found in my own experiences, as soon as I start to plan things, roadblocks come up. Corporations and governments and all of that, because they are an illusionary model, they're a linear model, they always have trouble. I always find it funny because you see a 5-year strategic plan or something like this and you think, wow, tomorrow's difficult to get through, and you're imposing 5 years over the universe. Good luck with that. This concept of spontaneity and the patterned way that the universe is key for the individual to bring into the world, because that's the way that the universe is. Science, even as arrogant in a sense as a scientific institution can be, they understand that things are cyclical, because you only have to see things in nature like that and how the human operates in that way. So to understand that consciousness is different to that would be pretty strange, considering that everything is consciousness in a sense. When the individual can bring that into the world, I think that if that happened today, we'd be living in a different world tomorrow. But again, life is process, so things will happen and emerge over time, and we're slowly seeing that. We could not think that 10 years ago that yourself, Kathy, Hal, and I would be speaking on a thing called Skype on the internet doing a radio show. It would just be ridiculous. You couldn't think of that 10 years ago because it wasn't even there. Right. But it happened of itself. It's just created. I don't believe a lot of these systems are intentionally created by a hierarchy. I think that's ridiculous. I think we give them too much credit in a sense. These things are created by creative people and then they're taken advantage of. We need to understand that everything is made of itself. That's the way spontaneity works. This is why I myself trust humanity and I trust the cosmos, because that's just the way it is. Even with the most frivolous nonsense, you only have to walk down the street to see the most frivolous nonsense. But it's only one aspect of humanity, so you can either get caught in the detail of that, or you can understand more of why that's there.
What are some of the underlying forces of the rhythm of the universe, or the rhythm of the world? Are they good or bad things? Is it the matrix, or is it God mind?
I don't think there would be maybe a distinction between matrix and God mind. When we look at the constitution of the universe, we see that rhythm and vibration are some of the fundamental forces of the cosmos. So you see the way that the reality is built, and it's built in this sense through rhythm and vibration. I don't think that we can sort of try and intellectualize why the rhythm and the vibration exists, or if there is an underlying force of the force. I don't think that that's really the way it is either. Only because I think a lot of these things that we spiritually are trying to explain, like what is the nature of reality, what is the nature of the universe, space, form, I think in a sense we get lost in a lot of it, especially in the matrix sense. For me personally, I don't care what other people talk about, but for me personally, from what I've gained, the knowledge that I know, not only from others around the world, but from my own experience, I don't believe that the moon's a spaceship and other planets are spaceships. I think that's kind of a misleading information, only because of how the moon, Saturn, Jupiter, all of these planets correspond to consciousness, which would say that they have an archetypal force that
it goes back to Hermeticism.
It goes back to the Hermeticism, yeah, which it underlies all of our being. For me to say that the moon's a spaceship would be to imply that consciousness in itself is just a created random event, which I think is ridiculous, because I see the universe as grown in the sense where it comes from within and then we experience it without. I don't think that it's created from the outside in. We've built a civilization on that, and we see the flaws in that, where we think if we gain information from outside that we're going to somehow better our being, when we understand that it's from the within that it actually happens. To think that the moon's a spaceship is like to imply that consciousness is created from without. Women themselves are spaceships because of their intimate relationship with the moon. I think a lot of that sort of, new age jazz. When you deepen your knowledge of self, you understand that, the moon's intimately related to consciousness, obviously, and to the woman and to the man, and how it's the receptive quality, the receptive principle of the universe. Not that the moon itself is the actual receptive quality of the universe, but it symbolizes that because it receives the light. So, from an intellectual perspective, this is the whole thing about the mystery of the universe. It's intellectually, we're always going to fall short of an answer of, from a human perspective, of what that underlying force of the universe is. No one's going to be able to present that at a conference or something like that. It just cannot happen. But the whole thing is, it's in the mystery where the answers are found. It's in that mystery of life. This is why in Buddhism, why Xunzan, one of the great masters, Zen masters from the 900 AD, this was a dialogue between a monk and himself, where the monk, he was asking the same questions that we are asking as a civilization, like, why am I here? And so he asked the monk, like, what is the Buddha? Being our true nature, what is the self? What is the Atman of the whole universe? And Xunzan's answer was nonsensical. There's a reason why it's nonsensical. He answered with 3 pounds of flax. Now, it doesn't make any sense, because when you think about it, what is the Buddha? And the answer is 3 pounds of flax. A lot of people have gone into this question and thought, was he actually weighing flax at the time, and he was sort of articulating the spontaneity of the cosmos? And that may be true in one sense, but the whole purpose of why he answered like that, either unintentionally or intentionally, was because he was demonstrating to the monk that you cannot actually intellectually understand the underlying force of nature. You've got to be sort of taken out of that conditioning. So that nonsensical idea sort of snapped him out of a conditioned or an intellectual answer, because it gave him an answer that was nonsensical, but also snapped him back into the reality, into the real world which exists here and now. So I like that sort of answer for that sort of question you asked, Kathy, because it sort of gives the nature of the way that the universe moves and is. And, if you want to explore rhythm, vibration, polarity, or anything, especially in the Hermetic arts, you'll get to more of a intellectual perspective of the underlying forces of nature. But a lot of the stuff in the modern day comes from a lot of fear perspective, where we think that, there's someone controlling our consciousness, or there's someone controlling the very reality that we exist. I think that's ridiculous. That's not the way it is. And the way that you can find that out is because you can have your own experience and be observant of it, and see that, in a sense, there's no one, say, alien force or elite controlling your reality in the truest sense, because you're a focal point of that one consciousness. So that one consciousness is emanating through you. So, no one can control that, because even the essence of trying to control that is that. And the very word matrix is being put into a different context in the developed world, because the very word matrix comes from the Sanskrit root word martar, which is M-A-T-R, I would say M-A-T-R in English. And these are ancient Greco-Latin words where you get matrix, meter, what else? There's plenty others, but what does that basically mean? Matrix means measurement.
Gauge, exactly. And see, that ties in with the warrior and the sage's perception, because one, what is the matrix? One who measures it. What is not the matrix? That who can see the universe, can see it in its pattern. That's the esoteric understanding of what matrix is, because matrix itself is not that we're in some sort of matrix, it's because we create the matrix, because we continue to measure. This all ties into the Sanskrit word of Maya, which is used in a lot of Hinduism and Buddhist sects, because Maya is related to matrix because it comes from the Sanskrit word matra. And Maya in itself can be seen in a few different ways, and none of them are right or wrong. One way it can be seen is that Maya is the vibratory structure of creation. So it's made through 4 ideas of creation, where you have sort of time, space, and atoms, obviously, and mind, which builds the vibratory structure of creation. Now, a lot of people think that that's Maya, and that is one aspect of Maya. But the truest essence of Maya, when you get into a lot of the ancient wisdoms, traditions, is measurement. It's just, it comes back to that warrior and sage's perception, because Maya is measuring the field. Because as soon as you measure the field, you are brought into the idea of definition and separation. Because with conditioning, you are taught to think about things. You know, the thinking of the thing is not the thing itself. You know, we've heard a lot of this before, where a lot of people say, you know, you think that's a tree, but that's not really what it is. That's not the essence of the tree. You're only projecting yourself, your mind, onto the environment. And that's what Maya is. It's projecting your mind, your conditioning, onto the environment and giving it forms, giving it measurement. And in its truest sense, this is sort of how, you know, I'm going to talk about a very ancient system here, but this is how astrology is. It was us projecting our mind onto the stars and seeing different forms. I'm not saying astrology is, in a sense, some sort of mental illusion, but that was how it was gauged to begin with, because it was a point of measurement. It's the way we think about things that builds the matrix. That's what it does. So it's projecting the mind onto the environment and saying, wow, that's a laptop, a microphone, a book, etc. These are the two oppositions of what the matrix can be. It can be actually related to that it's a vibratory atomic world that, you know, we can't somehow put our hand through the wall, that we know it's hollow, or it's just the measurement of it. Now, maybe in not understanding that it's a wall, you'll be able to put your hand through it. I don't know. I've never put my hand through a wall, but it's an interesting proposition. Absolutely, and some think that we'll be able to do it soon. Some have already done it, who are highly psychic or highly conscious or highly Jedi. The bottom line is this: we all signed up to be here at this very moment in time, and divinity and consciousness is not for sale, and it's not for free. And we just need to do the work and go within so we can get to the place we need to get to. And, you know, even Einstein said no problem can be solved by the same level of consciousness that created it. That's true, yeah. And Einstein's he was a very intuitive individual, wasn't he? He certainly was. I think this is a good time to take a break. What do you guys think? Yeah, perfect. Okay. At this time, I'm going to make a few announcements and a couple shout-outs. Last week, we had Genesis Sunfire on the show, and I would like to thank our Truth Connections team member and admin, Dee Dee Love, for initiating and assisting us with that show. Thank you, Dee Dee. I forgot to give you a shout-out during that show. And also, I would like to thank a musical artist that we have featured many times, Unitas Quick. His music has a Facebook page called Unitas Quick, and you can find more of his music at SoundCloud. And I'd like to thank Unitas Quick for being instrumental in setting this show up today, which is how I met you, Jason. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, Unitas is a great individual. Beautiful music. Yeah, he certainly is. And last and not least, I would like to thank Truth Connections group member and admin Tommy V for mixing and creating all of our intros and outros that we rotate and play each week. I haven't given him a shout-out for a while, so I wanted to say thank you very much, Tommy V. Okay, everyone, I'm going to play our break song, and it's called Tomorrow's Sun by Moses Child. And you can find more of his music at Reverb Nation. We'll see you back in about 4 minutes and 14 seconds. Enjoy.
one to confide in. I need no one to help get my side in. I've got me the sun and some cool shade to hide in. There's so much strength, just look from within. Gotta be so bold and never stay cross or you soon get old. Gotta be so bold and never stay cross or you soon get old. There's way too much for you to take pride in. This life's not meant for you to stay fried in. Don't get held down by your hesitation. One life has more than a million sensations. Never run unless you're having fun. Work is fine for later in tomorrow's sun. Never run unless you're having fun. Work is fine for later in tomorrow's sun. If you're too tired to smile, your day is done. You heard it before, your life has just begun. If you're too tired to smile, your day is done. You heard it before, your life has just begun. Gotta be so bold and never say cross or you soon get old. Gotta be so bold and never say cross or you soon get old. Gotta be so bold and never say cross or you soon get old. Hear the love, not the words, when you're getting sold off. Listen now to the records we've sold off. Having fun, and work is fine for later in tomorrow's sun. Never run unless you're having fun, and work is fine for later in tomorrow's sun. If you're too tired to smile, your day is done. You heard it before, your life has just begun. If you're too tired to smile, your day is done. You heard it before, your life has just begun. Gotta be so bold. Never stay cross or you soon get old. Hear the love, not the words, when you're getting told off. Listen now to the records we have sold off.
We are back. Thank you for being here with us this evening. I would like to invite everyone to please feel free to sign up for our YouTube channel, Truth Connections, and our Facebook page called Truth Connections. And you are also more than welcome to check out our truthconnections.wordpress.com website. Tamara has just added a huge documentary library there, and there's links in the guest library to where you can purchase any book from any one of our guests who has had a book, and there's also all the archives there. So you're more than welcome to take advantage of those resources. Jason, we are back. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm great. Yeah, it's been an awesome interview.
Thank you.
It's good to chat with you and Hal, actually, really good.
Thank you. We're very happy you're here. You have a very groovy vibration, and it's nice to talk to you as well, Jason.
I like that, groovy vibration. I like that. You two guys as well. Yeah, it's brilliant. Like we spoke about yesterday, Kathy, I just like meeting great individuals like yourself who are just inspiring others, so I think it's very important at the moment.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you saying that.
No worries.
Would you like to now go into the 3 planes of consciousness and the senses?
Yeah, definitely. The 3 planes of consciousness, a lot of people think that's sort of a new concept, but it's actually an old concept, which I've been sort of bringing up in a lot of my workshops, and I do go into it a lot in my new book. And basically, in the Hermetic tradition, Gnosticism, Hinduism, Taoism, there's always this underlying thread of that the being the individual, the total aspect broken down in an intellectual sense into 3 planes of consciousness, where you have sort of the physical plane, the mental plane, and the spiritual plane. Now, it's kind of a lot to get into in an interview, but the problem in a lot of traditions, especially spiritual traditions actually at the moment, is they're trying to only understand one aspect of their consciousness, which is the spiritual aspect of consciousness. And a lot of the problems with the masses is they're only trying to understand the physical and mental planes of consciousness. In saying that, what I mean by that is the majority of people only believe in their physical appearance and their conditioning, their mental states, while people in the spiritual tradition, they don't even want to acknowledge that they're a physical and mental being as well. They want to just try and resonate on the higher level. And the whole thing is missing the point. That's all eating the menu in a sense. Because one of the whole aspects in all of these great spiritual traditions is that you can't just know one aspect of yourself. You can't just try and understand the spiritual aspect of yourself. You need to understand your physical nature, your thoughts, your emotions, all of that, why you think like that, why you act like that, etc., and how you project that into the world. And the physical and the mental planes of consciousness are so intimately intertwined, because as we are slowly understanding, thoughts, emotions, etc., are vibrations which we project into the world and which we create as our experience. And that's how actually energy and the atomic world, the subatomic world, is all connected. So understanding all that, we see that the physical and mental plane is connected, because our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions become our experience. But that doesn't mean every single moment of it. And this is where a lot of, I would say, New Age sort of philosophy is sort of being misguided, because we think that everything is our karma. And in a sense, this is sort of a form of determinism, but it's not determinism in the truest sense, because if you understand who you are truly in a spiritual sense, you'll understand that there's really no one being determined. It's just really your experience that you're having. So in the New Age philosophy, they just think that everything is their karma. And this sort of can be a bit strange, because they start to think, like, say, with the atrocities in certain countries like Syria or Palestine, etc., a lot of people in the so-called love and light or New Age arena sort of think, that's just their karma, etc. And it's like, that's a grey area, because, you've got to realize, you know that, Kathy, it's a very grey area. And this is why in Hinduism they have sort of parabdha karma, which means, there's other people's karma as well involved to create a situation. It's not just your karma in a sense, you know what I mean? This is sort of like this. Sorry, no, you go.
No, I was just going to say, because people are starving in countries and don't have clean drinking water to drink, it's not their karma to be there. It's our karma for sitting and watching and doing nothing about it, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. We could go into a deep metaphysical conversation where we could say, but what about their past life and this and that? And the thing is, their past life, it's nothing that we can even debate about, because none of us know it. So, let's push that to a side. Let's deal with what reality is at the moment, the now. So the now is that there's people starving and that there's war atrocities and that on the planet. I'm not saying that that's their karma. I'm saying that it's a combination of everyone's karma involved in that. It's our pursuit of pleasure which is causing this. It's not embracing that there is a painful aspect of the individual. When you start to align the 3 planes of consciousness, you understand that from your own experience, this constant pursuit of pleasure is bringing us into a world of trouble. It's bringing a chaotic state to the world, because we're not understanding that no matter how hard you pursue pleasure, pain's always going to be there. Even unconsciously, it'll be there. It'll be lingering in the back of your mind, and you won't even know it. But there'll be certain things in your experience that will spike this. And this is why we have a whole civilization that is anxious. It's almost a state of panic, a collective panic attack really at the moment, where we don't trust each other, we don't trust anything external, we don't trust even ourselves. So, because we don't trust any of that, we've got to pursue pleasure, because that's the only thing that'll sort of give us comfort in our life. In the three planes of consciousness, it's to understand all aspects of your being, to try and understand even that pleasure and pain are part of the same thing. They're not separate modes of feelings. They are actually identical in nature, but they're different in degree. Like when we look at, say, the spiritual plane of consciousness, we see that ties in with a lot of how the sage sees the world. Like it's seeing the harmony within the physical and the mental planes of reality. So seeing the reality, you could say, and seeing the harmony play out. Also understanding that me, myself, I am still a physical entity. I still have the mind, and there should be no impulse into trying escape from that, because in a sense, what's your motive then? Your motive is fear. Your motive is like, I don't want the ego to speak to me. I don't want to be in this physical body. And it's like, well, fear is driving you still.
There's no coming to consciousness without pain.
Exactly. We've seen that through a lot of ancient philosophers, and especially in the modern day, we've had Carl Jung and that saying, embracing the darker, the shadow part.
That is who wrote that quote, Carl Jung.
Yeah, Carl Jung.
Thank you.
Embracing all of that. These are a lot of the illusions that a lot of people have. They think that people like, say, for instance, if Jesus, Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, Muhammad, Krishna, all of these, say if all of these beings actually truly existed, when you get into a lot of the teachings of all of these ancient sages, they never said that the ego disappeared or evaporated and the mind was just not there and they were an empty canvas. It's nothing like that at all. This comes back to Dharma and Te, from what we were talking about before, the virtuosity of the universe, that divine virtue. It's like life becomes more bright to you. You don't become just like a stone Buddha like we have in the world. You actually become a real Buddha, and you go about your life, but you go about it with a unattached vigor, like a very vigorous. But you're not attached to anything, not any ideology or any sort of concept or any conditioning. You come into the world like that. And I think that in a lot of the New Age philosophy, sort of the inauthentic spirituality we have on the planet, they think that Buddha and Lao Tzu and these type of individuals just didn't have the mind. And it's like, no, the mind always comes. But the difference is those individuals weren't a slave of the mind. They would listen to it talk, but they would not act out of it. They would always resonate on the higher. And this is sort of one of the keys in the three planes of consciousness, because if you understand that the spiritual plane of consciousness is to do with awareness, it's not to do with anything really else. The core of it is awareness. The core of it is how to see the world truly. Then you will always know that the mind, the physical body, are part of your being at the moment. It's not separate from you. So as soon as you imply that you're not that, you've already bought into duality. And the whole concept of spirituality is to reach a place of non-duality. In my travels, I've seen this a lot, because I've been around various different schools of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism especially. And in Hinduism, I've been around a lot of the schools of Advaita Vedanta, which is, Advaita actually just means non-dual, means seeing everything as one, but truthfully, like seeing it and feeling it as one. That understanding non-duality means that you shouldn't listen to your mind. You should know that you're not the physical body, and all of these concepts come up because of the way a master languages that. The master is languaging that in a way to say that you're actually not that, but now you are that. As soon as you buy into the idea that it's my mind, I don't want to listen to it, I don't want to talk to it, I know this physical body's not me, you're buying into duality, because you are implying that that aspect of yourself is separate. This is why I resonate in a sense with this philosophy, with the Zen way, because Zen is to understand that as soon as you do any of that, you're always buying into duality. When you continue to follow that path, you don't destroy the ego, or you don't get rid of the ego. You actually deflate the ego in the truest sense, because you realize that enlightenment, or what we think of enlightenment is, or samadhi or satori, is something that you cannot forcefully go for. You cannot sort of grasp with your hands, because as soon as you do that, you're implying it doesn't exist. This is the whole thing. This is the whole duality. As soon as you imply that something is not a part of you, you are buying into the concept of duality, which is not furthering the universe and not furthering the individual.
I think that we all need to look at ourselves when we want to come from ego and say, wait a minute, am I responding to this person in this manner because I have the right to respond to them that way? Or do I need to put my ego in check and think about this for a moment and answer it in a different way? A lot of people are still coming from ego.
Yeah, and it's difficult, Kathy, because as soon as you get thrust along this path, as you know, you and Hal would know, is, you know, a lot of questions come up because we're not really taught the right sort of knowledge as a child. We come into the world really as an infant, really. When we get to our adulthood, we're still at our infant stage in a spiritual way. And when you're in your mind, you're always analysing the situation. So, you know, am I coming from my ego, or am I doing this wrong? Or this is difficult because that's instantly built on duality again, because you're over analysing the situation.
Yeah.
So,
good point.
You know, the ego's flex over the individual is strong, and its hypnosis is strong because we have all of these new spiritual ways, which are, well, old spiritual ways that are coming back into the consciousness of the individual, and we are associating that with some sort of egotistical spiritual pride, I would say. So Zen, in the truest sense, makes no distinction between who's talking in my mind and how I should answer things, etc. And this is why when you go and visit, say, a Zen monastery, or you're around a Taoist, not a Taoist, sometimes in a sense a Taoist philosophical school, is when a master asks you a question, he expects an immediate answer. Why it is like that is because there's no deliberation, there's no sort of...
You're tapping into source.
Yeah.
Just rolling with it without even thinking about it.
Yeah, exactly, Kathy. That's it. And that's why they do it. And see, this is why in, like I mentioned, the Advaita school, Advaita Vedanta, non-duality schools in India, they go into, it's a beautiful path, but a lot of the people who are fresh to a lot of these new spiritual teachings go into too much analysis, sort of over-contemplating why they're thinking about things, you know, and it's like the whole thing is to get out of thinking, so don't even contemplate why you're thinking that. The whole purpose is not to think, it's to come back to source. When a Zen master asks a question and expects an immediate answer, that again aligns with the spontaneity of the universe. It aligns with Zhujian of itself. Whatever your answer is the right answer, that natural response. In the Zen tradition, they do have a lot of teachings which are called koans. They're just question and answer dialogues between master and disciple, and that's all it is. It's just a master asking you the most insane questions and looking for an immediate answer from you. But see, usually what happens is the insane question will usually put you off and put you into a thinking state. So it's almost like a test to see where you are as an individual. A lot of these old paths that have come back to the conscious, we are starting to intuitively understand them deeper and deeper, and as we grow, we'll traverse deeper and deeper steps.
Jason, a lot of this information you've reached by studying Eastern philosophies and Hermeticism. Do you perform any esoteric practices yourself, such as meditations or yogas, and what have your experiences been?
I've practiced a lot of things, actually, yes, over my time. Just basic meditation for me, sitting meditation is sort of my core root. It's sort of what grounds me in like what we said, in the three planes of consciousness, into a solid state. But I have practiced pranayama yoga before, mantra yoga, and I think mantra yoga is really good to sort of try and settle the mental state, because, you know, we've built a mental state it's built on a static world. There's a lot of noise, obviously, and I basically, over my time, I've practiced Kapalbhati pranayama, which is short, sharp breath, but I sort of went away from a lot of forms of yoga. I think yoga is great, don't get me wrong. Hatha yoga I'm talking about. Hatha yoga is the actual practice, the stretching and feeling the prana through the meridian lines of the body. I think that it's great, but the problem is in our world is because, you know, the way the world is, there's a lot of interesting understandings of Hatha yoga, and I would say not authentic approaches to it. In recent times, for the last year or so, I've really resonated with more of the ancient Chinese ways of Qigong and Tai Chi implemented with my standard contemplative meditation. Only because I feel that Qigong at the moment is at a stage of it's known around the world, but it's not known in its truest sense, because Qigong in itself is a science of the bioelectric energy within the human vessel, which is the same bioelectric energy within the earth. All Qigong is understanding the flow of Qi within the body and how Qi moves between the organs, between our extremities, etc. And it's about keeping that bioelectricity flowing unblocked within your being. If anyone is interested in Qigong at its depth, there's a lot of great masters actually in the modern day that are out there. Dr. Yang is one who comes to mind. But Qigong is not just about it is about the three planes of consciousness, because it's bringing that spiritual world and actually healing the physical body, because when you get that Qi flowing between the organs, you'll see that after a month or so, you'll see how the organs start to work easier and you start to get rid of your own dormant sicknesses. Qigong, again, is about understanding the organs themselves have actually an intelligence. So, for instance, like when we look at the liver, the liver it's one of the key organs in our body. Like when we die of cancer, when individuals die of cancer, what happens? The liver gets taken out of the equation. As soon as the liver gets taken out of the equation, what happens? You're gone. There's no way you can survive because you've only got one liver. And the liver does a lot of work. So the emotional quality attached to the liver is anger. So what happens when people drink a lot of alcohol? When they drink a lot of alcohol, what happens? They become emotional, they become angry, they become either angry or frustrated or anything like that. Not all the time, but let's be serious. 90% of the time when people drink a lot, they become emotional, aggressive, etc. And we usually see that because it's on a superficial level. We say that guy's pretty crazy and this and that.
They lacked coping skills.
Yeah, but in its truest sense, they've overstimulated their liver. Their liver is under stress. So that energy is expressed through the mental state. And this is why a lot of that happens. This is why people who are addicted to a lot of caffeine, again, the liver's attacked, the kidneys are attacked, and anger is the emotional quality addressed to them. So we're overstimulating our whole organism, actually, and all three planes of consciousness. We're overstimulating our organism physically, through the food we eat, the liquid we drink, mentally through what we listen and watch, and spiritually through disinformation. We're in a state of disequilibrium. As soon as you overstimulate any part of your being, you usually know that from a mental state because signals will come to your mind. But most people ignore that. Most people say, I don't think I've had enough coffee, I'm going to have 4 or 5 more. Or I don't think I've had too much to drink. They're only saying that because they know they've had too much to drink. They're not listening to the signals from the organs. A lot of that in the modern world is termed as metaphysics, but in China or in India, these sort of things are common knowledge to the one who studies Chinese medicine or Ayurveda. One of the reasons why the civilization is the way it is because we overstimulate the senses. We need to admit that, because what that does, when we overstimulate the senses, we suppress the creative principle of the whole universe, because the creative principle of the universe blooms when your physical, your mental, and your spiritual aspects of self are in alignment. And the problem is, we only eat with our eyes, we don't eat with what we need, and we do the same with liquid, we do the same with information, and we're pursuing pleasure. And all that's doing is harming not only yourself, but the whole species. The whole organism of the planet it's harming, because you're not bringing the creative principle into the world. And you only have to look out the window to see that we live in an uncreative world, because people only like shopping, they only like feeding their senses. They don't like exploring themselves and exploring the hunger, exploring their mind, exploring their consciousness. They don't like to do this. So I don't want to say that you have to go out and guard your senses. Again, that would be to buy into duality. The whole thing is to try and comprehend what you are. Comprehend what you are. And what will happen is when you understand more about your senses, understand more about the way that bioelectric energy works through your body, then you'll understand that creative principle of the source will begin to work through you. And that's what inspires the whole planet, the whole civilization into change without implying change. This is related to the 64 variables or the 64 ideograms of the I Ching, because the 64 ideograms of the I Ching is related to the 64 DNA strands, the DNA codons. The two base hexagrams of the I Ching is the creative and the receptive. So the more that you become aware of yourself, become more of not only your structure of DNA, but just more of your whole being, the more that the creative, which is the first principle of the I Ching, and the receptive, the second hexagram, which are both the masculine and the feminine forces of the whole universe, you begin to express that. So in you becoming more creative, you become more receptive to how the universe works. So in you being more receptive, that allows you to be more creative and inspire others. That's just the natural flow of how the universe is. So you can either put this into practice unintentionally and see how it is, or you could do it intentionally. But usually it has to be something that compels you to do it, because that's the spontaneous nature of how the universe is. Qigong, in that sense, will help the individual evolve in all three aspects. Even in the Gnostic tradition, where you have the three brains, where you have the motor instinctual, you have the intellectual and the emotional, that will help you in that way as well. I don't tell people that they should practice, because it's got to be something that they've got to be inspired to do. A lot of this comes down to Wu Wei, which what I talked about before, allowing things to happen. If you allow a spiritual practice or spiritual cultivation to come into your life, and you're not projecting a result, so you're not doing it because you want enlightenment, then that's great. But if you go into a spiritual practice because you expect to get to enlightenment, then you've missed the point.
We touched on this a little bit in the beginning. A lot of people are expecting a coming golden age, and in some of the Eastern traditions, there's the idea of the next incarnation, such as the incarnation of Vishnu Kalki, or the Maitreya Buddha, or Jesus, or the last Imam. Some people expect a change into a new age with more of a bang and a show. I wonder, what do you think about the new incarnation, Jason? Do you think it will be an individual as such?
I suppose esoterically what a lot of that information is talking about is that incarnation of, say, the Maitreya or the Buddha or the Christ is to do with within ourselves. So more of the light is revealed within a lot of the individuals on the planet. So they bring that sort of state of consciousness forward. I think that's more what they're talking about. As for if an actual individual is going to become a leader and grace the earth, I'm not sure. It's an interesting concept. If we want to think Muhammad and say Jesus were real, like who are our recent prophets or our recent ancient sages, I think that may have been for that time. I don't think we are in that particular sort of scope at the moment where there's just one individual that graces the whole planet and shows us the way. That's what a lot of that information is about, because in some sense you could travel to anywhere in the world and you could meet some of the greatest, most intuitive, Christ-like beings that you've ever met. You know what I mean? Like, you can go and meet a sage in China or India or Nepal or Egypt or anything like that. You can go and meet a sage there, and they themselves have an immense presence that you would feel that is similar to a Buddha or a Jivan Mukta. You might think that, hey, maybe if they had existed back in that time, there'd be stories about them as well. A lot of the superficial Christian ideas of that Jesus is going to come back. Well, I know Jesus is not going to come back. The reason why they think that is because they've just misinterpreted what they're saying. All they're saying is Christ, that consciousness will come back one day. Like, the world has a rhythm. We will go into a dark age and then we will reveal it. And I feel that as the ebb and the flow of the universe is, that's just what's happening now. Like, us three having this conversation, I feel is in the spirit of that. So, yeah, I don't personally believe that we are going to have an external savior.
I would like, if you don't mind, to ask you how consciousness affects any kind of ET contact.
My view of the universe is everything's connected. So I feel our consciousness has an effect on the mineral world. So I don't see why our consciousness would not have an effect with extraterrestrial intelligence, because for me, that would seem absurd because it's all there. I don't sort of step into the realm that I think that all extraterrestrial intelligence are spiritual beings and enlightened masters. I don't think that that's true in its sense. I think that all civilizations in the universe have their trials and tribulations.
Light and dark,
light and dark,
everything.
Yin and yang and everything. So that would not exclude aliens. I don't see how that would work, because that would imply that those extraterrestrial intelligence weren't local to the universe. So that would seem absurd. But I think that there is a relationship between us and all intelligences in the universe. And a lot of people tell me this. I travel the world speaking that, and I hear a lot of it from people, and I'm always receptive to all information. So a lot of people do speak to me about that they feel that they are being influenced by other aliens or other beings. I don't have that experience. Well, I don't feel that, but I'm open to the idea that, like, for instance, as we influence the world of an ant, I'm pretty sure that our world is influenced by higher intelligence as well, like as above, so below. I would see that it would work somehow in that fashion, but I'm probably way off, but close to in some way. But I don't have that experience where I actually meet these beings and have these journeys with them, but I'm not saying people don't. I think there is a definite relationship between us and alien intelligences. It would just be ridiculous for it not to be. At the moment, you hear a lot about the 21st of December that there's a lot of ET intelligences that are watching the planet. Yeah, I don't know. I would say that the vastness of the universe, there'd be a lot of civilizations in particular situations like we have now. So I don't know that the whole universe's scope would be projected onto the Earth at the moment, because it's pretty egotistical in a sense, because, to imply that we're the be-all and the end-all of the whole show meaning the universe, would be ridiculous. But we're related to everything, the mineral kingdom, the animal kingdom, human kingdom, and the universal kingdom. So to try and believe that you're outside of that, it's a struggle for anyone to do that. You're always connected to everything.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on December 2012?
I've got a lot of my own ideas on 2012, but I've often refrained from even expressing my own opinion on it. Like, I've spent this whole year myself with not getting involved actually into any of a lot of the judgments and the opinions on certain things that were happening this year. Like, for instance, the Olympics. We had a lot of people projecting their mind onto the Olympics because they thought that there was going to be a terrorist attack or an alien visitation was going to happen, etc. But nothing happened. But there may have been that something happened. But what truly happened was we unconsciously, again, gave our energy away to people whose best interest is not ours. We were manipulated psychologically in the unconscious because we saw symbolically through something like the Olympics that there's people planting things there for you to see, you know what I mean? Like, they are sort of playing and toying with the idea of an alien civilization, and they obviously purposely put Zion in, subliminally I should say, in the symbol of the 2012 Olympics, and they just let people run with it. And the whole thing is, what I knew was nothing was going to happen at the Olympics because, for starters, there's too much vested interest in the Olympics. There's too much money to be made for these people, and also there's royalty in the crowd. So, when they themselves are sitting in the crowd, I'm pretty sure that the whole stadium is not going to collapse in on itself. I sort of stayed away from a lot of what they were talking about that, because it was really tied in with 2012. Because a lot of people believed around the center of this year there was going to be the start of the decline into this nadir, this sort of vortex of time that the universe is going to step into. But nothing is really extraordinarily has happened. Like, we did have the Hurricane Sandy, which I believe was traumatic for a lot of people on the eastern part of America there. But we haven't had anything in a grand scale, you know what I mean? Like, this is one of the problems in actually a lot of the developed world at the moment, a lot of the modern psyches, because a lot of these stories or a lot of these myths from the past have been taken from civilization and have been given this sort of macrocosmic scope. So they're taking it from a particular deluge of the world and they've put it over the whole world. I'm not saying that there hasn't been pole shifts and that, etc. There has been pole shifts, and the tectonic plates have moved, and all of this continental drifts and ice ages. We've had all this, but I don't think every single part of the planet is affected in these certain situations. I think that's, again, our sensationalism. As a modern species, we sensationalize a lot of these things, and we give it Hollywood qualities. So why I've refrained a lot from I was going to write an article actually in 2012, but I refrained from it only because we've given a lot of Hollywood qualities to it, whether it's a fearful thing, whether it's going to be all love and light after 21st of December. What I feel is I'm going to be waking up on the 22nd of December and everything's going to be like it was on the 21st of December. That's what I feel. I know that may dishearten a lot of people, but a lot of these changes in the universe, like when we look into Hermetic arts like astrology, when we look at astrology, when changes happen in the universe, sometimes things aren't felt for thousands of years. So if something's changing in a particular solar system right now, we're not going to feel the effects of that then for another 1,000 years or even more. It depends on its scope. So something may happen on the 21st of December that's in the realm of the unconscious that we don't even know. And we may feel the effects of that 1,000 years from now. For something to happen on one day and change things categorically is against the way that the universe is. It's not how the universe is. So I'd like to put a lot of people's mind at ease there, because if you want to know how the universe is, go and study that and see how it operates, how it functions, how it moves, and how it is part of you. Don't look at the 21st of December and that fear propaganda, the solar storms and all of this sort of stuff. The destruction of the Earth is not going to happen. The merging, the ascension into 4 and 5D is not going to happen. Things are going to happen, but it's going to be on a realm that we don't even know. It's on a realm. It's like us contemplating the whole force of the whole cosmos. It's something we cannot intellectualize. It's something that we can feel. The reason why 2012 is here is because we feel it and we're seeing the effects of it. None of the propaganda out there is thoroughly researched. I think that it hasn't been justified in the truest sense. So anyone out there who's either thinking that they're going to reach enlightenment on the 21st of December or that they're doomed, I'd say that you've missed the point. You're eating the menu, because freedom, liberation, enlightenment, the self, understanding the self, the true self, the nature of your existence, is up to you. It's not up to anyone else. It's not up to external phenomena to show you that. Obviously we can speak about it today, and we can give people sort of the tools to work on themselves. Like we spoke about Qigong. It's a tool. It's not in itself the realization. It's a tool. Meditation is a tool in a sense. It's not the actual experience of enlightenment. So the 21st of December, it's not going to change anything in the sense of if you're not willing to change yourself, because the scope of the self is infinite. It's not categorized in one day in the 21st of December. All of the fear propaganda, all of the hoopla and 4 and 5D have all been awash in sort of the realm of misinterpretation, because even when we talk about dimensions, levels, and all of that, Hal and Kathy, when we speak about those sort of things, a lot of those come from actually a lot of the ancient traditions. Especially in Buddhism, because Buddhism is a very contemplative tradition. They speak about dimensions and levels, but they don't speak about them outside of themselves. They're talking about within their own being about these dimensions and these levels. So what we do in the modern world is we do this with many things. We anthropomorphize everything into external phenomena. So that's why God has human qualities. That's why dimensions have alien qualities. All of this sort of stuff. What we need to understand is the fourth dimension is about a way of thinking, a way of knowledge, a way of wisdom. Same with the 5th dimension. They're just different higher planes of consciousness. They're not actually the reality, the external phenomenon is not going to change in that sense, because it can't. Well, external phenomenon in reality and the physical world will change, but it can't change overnight. It has to progress. Our ever-increasing complexity in the world is showing that we are progressing to some sort of point, but that may be only one point, and then there may be another one above it, another one above it. A lot of masters say, when you are on sort of your own path to self-realization, you think you've reached the top of a great mountain, but you've only reached the foot of an even bigger mountain. You know, that's just how the journey is. Collectively, I don't see how it would be different. So the 21st of December, for me, it symbolises sort of a marker, in a sense, just a point in a pattern that's unfolding. And I think actually after the 21st of December, we're going to continue to progress spiritually, mentally, and physically. And even the complexity is going to get even more crazier in that sense. I think time will still even increase. You know, that may only be speculation at the moment because we're in November. But let's speak in 2013 and we'll see where we are.
Excellent place to end it, Jason. Thank you.
It's been great.
Thank you. It's been fabulous having you on. You're a beautiful human being, and I thank you. Very gracious, kind person.
Thank you. Thank you. You are both beautiful beings. And I love life. I love doing what I do, and I love meeting great people like yourself.
Oh, we appreciate you being here. Would you please, in closing, mention your website for the audience?
Yeah, my website's oneworldwithin.com, and you can find me actually in all the forms of social media, I should say, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. All of that's under the sort of the One World Within sort of network umbrella, but you'll find that at my website. So go to oneworldwithin.com.
Excellent. Thank you once again, Jason, and thank you, Hal, for joining us on this call this evening. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Our closing song is going to be by a mutual friend of ours, Jason, Unite Us Quick, and the song is called Getaway. You can find more of his music on Reverb Nation in case anyone's interested. And on behalf of myself and Tamara, I would like to thank everyone for being here and say, if you put yourself in a position where you are forced to stretch outside your comfort zone, you are forced to expand your consciousness. Until next time, be good to each other. Thanks for being here.
Something happened here.
Hi everyone, Tamara here. Just a reminder that you can connect with us through Facebook, as well as subscribing to us on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/truthconnection. We'd love you to join us during live shows at blogtalkradio.com/truthconnections. And for information on upcoming shows, visit our website at truthconnections.wordpress.com. Thank you for your support, and never forget that the truth is reality, and the connection is you.